Just Imagine, a podcast series by Imagine Theatre.
Hello again and welcome to episode 9 of this podcast series from one of the UK's biggest producer of pantomime and children's theatre, with preparations well underway for the return of Panto this Christmas.
For more information, go to their website at www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.
If this is the first time you've heard a Just Imagine podcast, my name is Martin Ballard, and in each episode I take you behind the scenes at Imagine Theatre, meeting the people who make the company tick and some of the stars who appear in their shows. Now, if you missed any of the previous episodes with directors, producers, choreographers and performers like Eric Potts, Ian Lachlan and Sam Bailey, don't forget all of the previous episodes are still available. In episode 7, we met the man who's worked in the entertainment industry across theatre, concerts, sporting events and many others all over the country for 34 years, lighting designer Jamie Corbidge. In this episode, I've been joined by the writer and theatre director with more than 25 years of experience at theatres like Birmingham Rep, the National Theatre and the Mercury Theatre Colchester in this country, as well as many others around the world. In fact, she's based in Denmark, so if I can switch to Eurovision mode, calling Copenhagen, and Janice Dunn, how are you?
Hi Martin, I'm really great, lovely to speak to you.
I mentioned that you're in Denmark. Give us an idea of what it's like over there at the moment, weather-wise, and how you're coping with COVID.
It's been roasting hot for a while now, about a week to 10 days, and I'm fortunate enough in Copenhagen to live quite near a couple of beaches. So we've been swimming and on the beach with the kids, and it's been great. But today, we're really glad it's a bit cooler. And as far as COVID is concerned, my feeling is that the Danish government's handled it extremely well, actually. Initially, when the whole thing broke over a year ago, which feels like a lifetime away, doesn't it?
Yeah.
The government here went into lockdown very quickly. So the kids were off school. And of course, everyone handled it. And we had a break again, over summer and the autumn. It kind of calmed down again. And then towards Christmas time, they announced that they were going to make some stops again. And we went into another lockdown. And it's worked well, as the numbers of contractions and deaths have been extremely low here, really. And on the whole, I think people have supported it and felt quite safe. And there's been quite a good vaccine rollout as well. By July, I think everyone who wants one will have had one. So I think we're one of the better ones in Europe in that sense.
And have you been vaccinated then?
I have. I've had my first one, and I'm having my second one the week after next. So that's good.
I don't know about you, but I feel much better and possibly much safer now that I've been vaccinated.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's one of those things where a lot of people need to do it for everyone to feel the benefit. But yes, of course, it makes me feel a little bit better, sort of going out in public and being around and working with groups, which is what I do. So, that it does. I feel more protected, as it were.
So let's start at the beginning for you. When did little Janice Dunn start to get an interest in theatre? Was it, by any chance, going to see Panto as a kid?
Of course, it absolutely was, because I come from quite an ordinary working class background from Liverpool, and we weren't a theatre-going family, as you may imagine. But of course, we did go to the pantomime. I think sometimes we went with the school, but it was my nan, really, who took us on. She'd take all the grandkids in one lump. There was like 5 of us. But she'd take us all mop-handed to different theatres, the Liverpool Empire, the Royal Court, which is, of course, a big sort of variety theatre in Liverpool, the Neptune, which is now called the Epstein Theatre, of course. So from as young as I can remember, there was a kind of pantomime thing. I'm one of the young grandchildren. So I was obviously being dragged along from a very young age. And do you know, Martin, I can remember my first panto.
Can you? Who was in it?
Frank Highfield.
Oh, I remember you.
I remember you as well, yeah. And he was at the Liverpool Empire, and it was Dick Whittington. He was playing Dick, and he was about 40 at that point. Young lad from Gloucester or whatever. Of course, he was saying, "I remember you," and everyone went bonkers in the audience. Billy Dainty was the Dame.
Oh, fabulous Dame, wasn't he?
He was amazing. He's nearly as good as you, Martin. His rapport with the audience was just joyful. And at one point, he asked for a volunteer from the audience. He wanted a nice lady. Of course, all us kids, us grandkids, went bonkers. We were like, over here, with our hands in the air. And he picked us out, and he made my nan stand up. And the Liverpool Empire seats 2,000 people. So there she was, she stood up. He'd come down into the audience, and he was flirting with her, doing all kinds of stuff. And she was laughing, everyone was laughing. It was really fun. And then he'd got her a present, and it was a 22-carat necklace, which was, of course, a piece of rope with 22 carats on. And he put it around her neck. We thought it was the funniest thing we'd ever seen. It made a pretty strong impression. You know, as a kid, the magic, you know, the lights going down, the music starting. They did what we call a bleed through, which is where you have a flat cloth, but it's actually a gauze, and it's painted. And if you light it from the front, it looks like a normal cloth. And then when you put lights on behind, you can see through it. And often at the beginning of a pantomime, we use this. You see what's behind the cloth, and there's people and bustling town, and then the cloth goes away, it flies up into what we call the flies. And I remember that happening, and I remember sitting with my mouth open, and it really did seem like magic. And I still use that old trick now, actually, as much as I can.
Well, it still works. You know, why change it? But of course, Billy Dainty, I never saw him as Dame. I've only ever seen him on film as Dame, but he was a master of the physical comedy as well, the walks and so on. Rather like, you know, completely different to somebody like John Inman or even Les Dawson, but more like somebody like Nat Jackley, who many older listeners might remember.
Mr. Rubberneck.
What a joy to see Billy Dainty as a Dame.
Yeah, I mean, he was amazing. He was absolutely brilliant. Like I said, his rapport with the public was second to none. I mean, I never saw Nat Jackley, although he did work Coventry a lot, I believe. But when I worked with Ian Lachlan, the rapport that Ian had at that time, that was sort of similar, and it was very exciting as well then to start working on pantomimes with someone who had that kind of rapport. But of course, you know, there are different types of dames. There's the guy in a frock kind of dame, and there's the neat little dame, and there's the really physical slapstick dame. And now, as time has developed, there's a more kind of what I would call RuPaul kind of dame, which is also nice, and I think people really, really, really enjoy.
Well, actually, we'll talk about that on a future episode, because you've worked for a number of years with JP McHugh, and he is another totally different sort of dame, quite acerbic, and he's got that rapport with the audience as well.
He's like your strict mum or your strict auntie that you really like, but doesn't have any messing about. He's got that kind of rapport with his audience. I love working with JP. He's very funny. He's a very warm person as well, and there's a mixture of that and the other side of him, which is his drag queen persona, actually, in that. So it's a nice mixture of the two. But there is that. I think people enjoy the edginess, because with JP, I suppose there's a feeling of you're never quite sure what might happen.
That's one of the joys of panto anyway, because every performance is unique for any number of reasons, not least the audience interaction. Let's get back to you for a moment, though, because what happened in between little Scouser Janice Dunn going to see a panto to Janice Dunn, theatre director, writer and so on? What happened? How did you come to that career?
When I was younger, I didn't really realise that was something I could do. It never really occurred to me. Actually, like I said, we weren't a theatre-going family, so I saw my first actual play when I was 15, and it was with my youth theatre. I went to a place called the Wirral Youth Theatre. They got us free tickets, otherwise we wouldn't have gone, I guess. And it was to see Lennon, the musical play about John Lennon, and it was at the Liverpool Everman, which is, I don't know if you've ever been there or worked there, Martin. It's an amazing theatre, full of atmosphere and history. The night we were there, Victor Spinetti was there. And Victor Spinetti, as you know, is an actor, and he's worked with Joan Littlewood, who went on to become a great hero of mine. But most importantly, he'd been in all the Beatles films with them. And he was sat in the row behind us. But then we watched the play, and the play was amazing. It was amazing. And it was only about a year after John had been shot and died. So it was really moving. And at the end, everyone went bonkers, and Victor Spinetti stood up behind us, and everyone stood up, and he was crying. And it was like this really moving experience that meant something. And again, I didn't really know what theatre was, but I certainly didn't know it could do that. You know, I carried on with my youth group and I got really, really into it and excited by it. And then I suddenly realised I used to watch what the director did and I used to think, I'd like to do that. I could do that. It's because for me, I looked at it and thought, it's like seeing the big picture.
Mm-hmm.
It's like solving problems. It's like putting a story together. I kind of broke it down into what I thought it was. And I thought, well, they're things I like to do. I suddenly realised when I was about 17 or 18, I want to do this. But for me, it was very hard because it's like, well, I'll tell you what my mum said. I mentioned it. Do you know what? I think I'd like to work in theatre. And she just looked at me and she said, and it sounds like a cliche, but this is the truth. She said to me, people like us don't do that. And my little balloon burst. And I thought, oh, right. Yeah, you're probably right. And so I did something else for a year. But then I realised that, no, I really, really do need to do it. So I changed and I got into Bretton Hall College, which was doesn't exist anymore.
No.
But a bit like Rose Bruford,
yes.
was one of those intense sort of physical theatre places. I mean, it's a part of Leeds University, but it's very much its own thing. It's in between Leeds, Wakefield and Barnsley, and it's right next to Woolley Pit, as it was. It doesn't exist anymore. And I was there in the 80s. And so I was there when it was the miners' strike. So it was extremely political place to be with this kind of gritty physical theatre. John Godber had been there a few years before me and doing all this political work and supporting the miners. We really obviously supported the miners. But it was a really interesting time. Weirdly, the journey from there to Panto is quite an interesting one because when I left college, I wouldn't have thought that I'd end up going back to kind of where theatre began for me.
It's interesting that when you start to talk about home and Liverpool and the everyman and all that sort of stuff, your accent becomes stronger and you slip into some sort of Carla Lane character.
Do you know what? Sam Bailey said that to me. I'd been talking to people from home loads the day before we started rehearsals, and I went in and I was talking to everyone going, hi, welcome, blah, blah, blah. And she said, why are you talking like that? I said, well, what do you mean? She said, you didn't talk like that last year. I said, well, I hadn't just all been talking to my family. I said, it depends. I'm one of those people where my voice can really change. And she was quite shocked. She thought I'd had some kind of personality transplant or something. Obviously after a day or so, it faded off. So
when did the writing start? Not just Panto, because you've written all sorts of other stuff as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I write a really wide range of things. And now I write plays in Danish now. So that's also that's a bit mental, actually. But there we go. Who would have ever thought that? It's interesting because what I said about it was hard to get into theatre and hard to make a decision to do theatre because of what my mum said, which was actually true. I found that even more so with the writing, I found it very hard. Originally I wanted to be a director, but obviously after a while, when I was working in rep theatres, I was doing things and then I'd be like, oh, well, okay, this is a short project. I can script this. I'll do this. So it started off by just I'll just script something. And I tell myself, oh, I'm just scripting it. Other people have had the ideas and I'm just scripting it. And it took me a few years to go, I'm writing. And then I started to kind of almost be commissioned to write things. So obviously you are really a writer then when people are coming to you and saying, okay, we'll pay you this amount to write this play for us. And it was a friend of mine who lived in Coventry, and I was in my 30s now, and she said to me, you're a writer. You write and get paid for it. That's what you are. And I realised that I found it very hard to say. I found if something in me felt that I was a fraud. They call it imposter syndrome, I believe. And now, over time, I've come to terms with it.
It's interesting to trace this back as well. In many ways, your directing, your writing, your link with Imagine and Panto to a certain extent all goes back to the Belgrade, doesn't it? Because I think your first writing was at the Belgrade, wasn't it?
That's right, yeah. You'd work with like the senior youth group and they'd do something and then you think, okay, well, we're going to share this, but I don't want it to just be an improvised kind of ramble through their ideas. I want it to be more supported because the work they're doing is actually really good and I can support it by organising their ideas and scripting them, like I said, and then it turned into other things where I was then also doing that for professional actors. I started out as an assistant director on a short-term contract for a community play. And I got kept on and I got promoted. And I ended up, as 9 years later when I left, I was associate director and decided to leave because I felt like it was time to move on. That was the only reason. It was an amazing time of professional growth.
COVID-19 has been so destructive to the arts in so many ways, particularly freelancers. How have you coped, Jan? Because obviously a lot of the stuff that you do hasn't happened, and you're a parent, of course, so with homeschooling and stuff to consider as well.
I lost all my UK work because of COVID, and that was a big problem financially, as it would be for anyone, and loads and hundreds of thousands of people, freelancers in England, were in the same boat. I mean, luckily, obviously, I'm registered self-employed. I still pay tax in the UK, and sort of will for the foreseeable future, as a portion of my work is there. That I was lucky enough to get one of the SICE grants from the HMRC, so that helped, obviously. But strangely, I work in a drama school as a director, sort of part-time here, and that work carried on. I mean, we all closed down in March, but by April, that place was reopened and we continued to work socially distanced. For me, I think there's probably quite a lot of people at the beginning of their careers who've sort of hit a wall with COVID and not been able to earn, any money doing what their normal job is, i.e. working in the entertainment industry, and maybe end up leaving it for good. Because I think if you're not established already, then, you haven't got people you can call, or if you've not got these other jobs, like I said, the job I have here with the drama school, just surviving would have been really difficult.
I think you're right, especially actors, anybody in theatre who's just literally finished training with no experience or reputation so far, missed out on agents, showcases and so on, may not have been able to pick up agents or work, and may have thought, I can't, on the back of student debt as well, I can't go on, I'm going to have to look at something else. Yeah. The industry is resilient, we know that, it has to be, and we are so desperate to get back with Panto this year at the De Montfort Hall in Leicester, and you're writing this one.
I am, because normally I write the Leamington Panto for Imagine, but I'm also now writing Leicester. And of course, we were due to do this last year, and then it couldn't happen. But here we are, and it looks like it's going to happen this year, which is really exciting. And when I imagine us all being back in the rehearsal room at the Curve and working together and laughing and finding new stuff in what's been written. I mean, it gives me a really kind of happy feeling, thinking that we can get back to that, get the audiences back in safely, get people together again and laughing, enjoying stories and enjoying jokes, listening to music, joining in, all those things. I think, I'm hopeful for a really positive festive season.
I think the one thing that we've all missed more than anything is that social interaction. We've been kept apart from each other with social distancing and restrictions for so long. There's no better way than to bring back Panto, to bring people together. With Panto in mind, 3 final quick questions for you. The first of which is, what is Janice Dunn's favourite Panto title?
Dick Whittington. And that's because it was the first pantomime that I remember. Good old Frankie Ifield, with too much 5 and 9 makeup on. His face was orange, like it was glowing almost from the auditorium. But yes, Dick Whittington, and a panto that I fear will disappear from the pantomime canon fairly soon, because it has no kind of commercial link. Unlike the big names, unlike the Aladdins and the Sleeping Beauties and the pantos that are related to a more commercially successful story. But I hope it doesn't, but I fear it will.
But what we need is Disney to do a Dick Whittington movie, and then it'll be safe, won't it? Because that's effectively where most of the material for Panto comes from these days. The ones that have lasted are the ones that have become Disney movies.
That's right, the ones that have become kind of sort of big commercial successes. Yeah. That when people see the title, they go, oh, we want to see that. And I think less and less people know the story of Dick Whittington, and it's potentially less and less relevant to people's lives. It's a kind of strange story as well, but I do worry it will disappear, and that there's already, I think, statistically, a lot less productions of it than other things. And some have already disappeared altogether, like Babes in the Wood.
Yeah.
It's virtually gone.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not surprisingly, because it's about two children who are kidnapped and taken out in the wood to be killed. It's a little bit like, oh, okay, sleep well, everyone. You know,
But all of those original ones are dark in different ways. But I remember as a kid seeing Sinbad, seeing Robinson Crusoe.
Yeah.
I think the other reason why some have disappeared is that I don't think parents are reading fairy tales to kids like they used to. Kids are now putting on a DVD or watching it on Netflix or whatever these days. So they're seeing the Disney movies, but they're not reading the fairy tales, the Grimm's brothers, the Hans Christian Andersen and so on. So they don't know the story. So therefore they don't want to go and see a panto that they don't know the story of.
Yeah, and it's funny, isn't it? It's like now we want to know everything about what we want to see. If you can't know who's in it, like in a blockbuster film where people go, I'll go and see that because so-and-so's in it. Or that'll be good because Anthony Hopkins is in it or whatever, which is what we do now. And I think we've always done. I mean, pantos years back have always had names in them. But I think that if we don't know the names in it necessarily, we maybe want to at least know the story. And those older stories that aren't so well known, like Babes in the Wood and or sometimes Robin Hood and the Babes in the Wood, as it was called, or Puss in Boots.
Yeah, Mother Goose.
Or Mother Goose or Dick Whittington, indeed, will disappear as people go, oh, yeah, Aladdin. And so those stories like Sleeping Beauty and Beauty and the Beast, indeed, have come in to replace these older stories. And the whole pantomime canon, as we call it, has changed. Peter Pan is now frequently done.
Yeah.
And of course, it was never a pantomime.
Well, because there's no dame in it for a start.
No, exactly. Yeah. And there were always anomalies, and you have to make dames. So if you're doing, as I know, because I'm writing Sleeping Beauty right now, you have to make a dame, as you do in Beauty and the Beast, as you do in Peter Pan. You have to make them into pantomimes because they're not. Whereas Aladdin has been a pantomime for literally hundreds of years. So it is my favourite, but I do fear within my lifetime, I hope, it will slip away.
It's interesting because a couple of other people picked Dick Whittington, and they picked it because they say it has everything that you need. It has the adventure, the relatable to a real person, albeit, tenuous in history. So there you go. In terms of not just Panto, but any other shows that you've been involved with, when was it not all right on the night, Jan?
Oh, right, okay. I had, this is actually related to a pantomime, but it didn't happen on the night, but it had a huge impact on what happened. This actually happened at the Belgrade Theatre. We were doing what we call the get-in. And for people that don't know, the get-in is when everything technical arrives, gets put in the theatre, and the lights start to get pointed at it, and you start to put the whole thing together. This is just before you put the actors on and then start to make the whole thing together. So before the dress rehearsals and all that. And pantomime at the Belgrade was huge, with sets all made by the company, made at Red Lane, our workshops. And they were huge, they were enormous things, designed by India Smith, who was an excellent panto designer. The get-in was always on a Sunday, but I would always come in, I live quite near, and I was just come in and check how everything was going. And India was there all day, and she designed and spent the best part of a year designing these amazing things that were realised. And then there they all were, and you'd come in and you'd stand in that big auditorium, and there'd be bits of set leaning everywhere, and then you'd see it all come together. And we were sitting on the back of the seats, about halfway up the auditorium, with this huge set. It had been put up, it had taken hours and hours, it had taken months to build. There were cloths hanging down, all this stuff was set up on the stage. We were getting near the end of the day. I was sitting next to him, we were talking, and on the other side of us was the production manager, and that's the person who runs all the technical side. We were chatting and looking quite satisfied with ourselves, thinking, this looks amazing, people are going to love it. They were carrying the last big piece of set across the stage, and we have in theatres, not all theatres now, but there used to be a thing called a drencher. I don't know if you know, the audience knows what that is. It's something that if there's a fire, you would pull a lever and water comes down from above. So it was a safety measure, but they always have a lock on them, obviously. Anyway, I think you probably know where we're going here. For some reason, someone had unlocked it for the get-in. Not a normal thing to do, but there we go, it happened. And they were carrying this big piece of satin, and the guy at the furthest end walked into the wings, and he turned around and his elbow caught the drencher and pulled it as he lifted. And we were sat in the auditorium, and suddenly gallons and gallons and gallons and gallons of water suddenly drenched, literally fell down upon the stage. Everyone on the stage got a shock, ran. So people who were holding things, they then dropped. It was it was a little bit like watching a disaster movie. You know, when things happen almost in slow motion and you can't do anything to stop it. And I sat there, and it happened. India, the designer, she stood up and then just froze. It took about 45 seconds to just stop, with just water everywhere running off the front of the stage. Obviously very dangerous because there's electrics, and bits of set broken, hanging. And we just turned to her, and she was frozen. She was like a wax dummy, and no one could believe what had happened. Amazingly, it could have meant the cancellation of the show, of course, but amazingly, you know, people worked overnight. I stayed, India stayed, everyone stayed. We cleared up. The people came in, they repaired the set, and we opened as we should have done on the Thursday.
Wow.
Amazingly, having dried the theatre out somehow. And it became a bit of a classic story in the Belgrade history. But it was at the time one of those things where you think, well, that's it. We've broken everything. And actually, through everyone just being so committed to making it happen. And of course, it has to happen because it pays for the rest of the year that we did it.
In terms of Panto itself, and I guess this might link back to that story you told about your mum, you know, when you were very young, saying people like us don't work in the theatre. Oh. Why is Panto so important to you?
Because every time I direct a Panto, I remember sitting in that Liverpool Empire, 3 rows from the front, which must have cost my nan a pretty penny in those days. She worked in a sweet shop, so she'd obviously saved a lot of money to take these 5 kids and her into those, what were very nice seats indeed, at a place like that. And I remember those feelings, like I said earlier, of watching it. I'll never forget them. And if I hadn't have had those, I probably wouldn't have ended up going into theatre. But it's not about how many people from a working class background go into theatre, although more of them would be good, in my opinion, still. But it's about people having a cultural experience. It's about people coming together and having an experience that's about stories and about conflict and about what happens when people are happy and what happens when people are sad, about laughing together, about crying together, about joining in together, about feeling part of one big thing. It's like what we have in common is we're all here. What we have in common is we're all people from this area who've come to see the show that's been made for us. And for me, that's what integration is. And I know for a fact, because I work in the business, that there are a huge amount of working class people who are involved in culture and go and see things. But it's Panto that they see. And in my opinion, it's a much maligned genre from a lot of people who don't know what they talk about it and look down upon it. But that actually it has real meaning for the people who see it. You know, whole generations of families being together and laughing together, and that doesn't really happen anymore. You know, we don't have those Saturday night generation game moments where your whole family's sitting together. Everyone's in different rooms watching different things. You know, you don't have your Morecambe and Wise Christmas show. And I know I'm probably making myself sound quite old-fashioned now, but actually having those times when ordinary people are together, enjoying something, laughing at local references, or, like I said, singing or clapping or whatever it is, for me it's really important that theatre and entertainment and culture is available for those people. And because I know for a fact that it does open up different kinds of worlds and new opportunities to people, because it did for me. So I hope that's why it's important for me to do it. And I sit there at the back and I watch all this unfold in front of me. And long may it continue.
You're absolutely right. I think it's the most important access point for theatre for so many people, but it's also about that shared experience. And we have very few of those these days. You're absolutely right. And it wasn't necessarily the fact that it was Morecambe and Wise or the Generation Game or any given programme. It was the fact, possibly more so, that we had so few channels to choose from, so everybody would come together and watch that. And they were classics, don't get me wrong. It's been a joy talking to you, it really has. I look forward to seeing you in November. Fingers crossed. In the meantime, Janice, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Martin.
And that's about it from this episode. Next time I'll be talking to the Senior Curator of Modern and Contemporary Performance at the Victoria and Albert Museum. He's also the Curator of the National Database of Pantomime Performance and founder and coordinator of National Panto Day. Nobody knows more about Panto than Simon Sladen. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss that or any of the future episodes. And make sure you join me, Martin Ballard, next time for episode 10 of Just Imagine.
Thank you for listening to the latest edition of Just Imagine, the podcast series from Imagine Theatre. And you can find out more by going to www.imaginetheatre.co.uk.